I just want to first, of course, say thank you for joining us today, and welcome to today's discussion, the Visegrad Insight event. We're here to discuss the ongoing security situation in Europe, vis-a-vis the repositioning of a previously more reliable transatlantic security guarantee. Although this week has had some very kind of positive movements, especially from the U.S. Congress and President Biden. As well as a need, though, for there to be a realignment of European priorities to be more effectively combat the unfortunate deteriorating security environment for the EU. Now, these points and many more were more articulately and recently outlined in a text by one of our panelists, Martin Zaborowski, in an article called The EU's Defense Renaissance, Navigating Strategic Autonomy and Industrial Resurgence. That's available for you all on our website for subscribers, and I really encourage you to look at it to have kind of further questions. Now, before I introduce the panelists, I want to let you know of the structure for our discussion today. We will begin with opening remarks followed by a few follow-up questions, which will be kind of quote unquote on the record, before we open up the discussion to the floor for off the record questions. However, I want to encourage you kind of right now and throughout the remarks or kind of questions that you kind of hear to either text or write your questions into the chat channel, or kind of jot them down so you have them ready when we have time to move to the off the record Q&A. Lastly, and this is important though, I want to mention there's a special discount for annual subscriptions today, and you'll find more details about that in that chat as our colleagues will populate that periodically throughout the discussion. Okay, so without further ado, I'll begin by introducing our panelists. Today we have, as I mentioned before, Martin Zaborowski. He's the Policy Director at the Future of Security Program at GlobeSec, an Associate Senior Fellow at Visegrad Insight. In the past, Martin served as the Executive Director of the Polish Institute for International Affairs and the Vice President for the Center of European Policy Analysis. Martin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. And our other panelist today is Alina Anaya, and she is, I'm very proud to say, part of the Spring 2024 Martin Kroll Fellowship here at Visegrad Insight. She is currently a non-resident fellow with the German Marshall Fund and the lead advisor for the Aspen Institute of Romania. Alina, thank you as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. So, Martin, the first question goes to you, as well as your opening remarks. So I just want you to kind of keep this in mind as you're discussing, but it relates to the escalating conflict at the kind of EU's doorstep. So the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia has brought the war to the EU's borders. It kind of poses an immediate threat to the regional stability. And this escalation demands a robust response from the European leaders. My question to you is, will they step up to the challenge?
Okay, well, that's a very broad question, but so it gives me a chance to go into some further details, and I'm gonna take like up to 5 minutes just to in responding, but I believe as our time is limited. So clearly we are at this cusp at this moment where we have a war at the doorstep, and suddenly we realize that we are lacking a great deal of many things. We don't have a relevant defense posture. We don't have the sufficient defense capabilities, and we don't have sufficiently strong defense industry. So defense industries, especially on the eastern flank of NATO, are in a very poor shape and have been massively neglected over the entire post-communist period. So here we are. We all want to help Ukraine. We've been doing it. But obviously some of us who are less willing to do so, but overall the will is there, or has been at least for quite a long time. And you know, in a sense, that shouldn't be that difficult because you have like 32 NATO members, most industrialized nations, representing altogether, as Sikorski was saying in his address today, almost 1 billion people. Yeah? These are, you know, industrialized nations, wealthy nations, with the defense budgets much bigger altogether when you put it together than what Russia has. So that shouldn't, and quite modern, yeah. So that shouldn't be that difficult to do that, but it is difficult, and the reason why it is difficult is because of the posture that we have adopted after the end of the Cold War, and the posture has been this: that essentially this is time to, of peace dividend. This is a time to enjoy ourselves. We can cut on defense spending. We can cut on troop presence. And Russia may not be a very nice power, but it is not a threat. And the ways to organize security in this kind of a context was not by material means, but by the means of by legal and political means. So, for example, NATO enlargements in 1999 and the following NATO enlargements have been very much just a legal motion, yeah, without much of a change in actual posture. So posture started to evolve much later. But until then, until really quite recently, it was believed that it would be escalatory, counterproductive to actually change the posture. So, and as we were enjoying this time and actually only living in the illusion that we are more secure because we signed up to North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which covers us by Article 5, in reality, we've been wasting time, and Russia at the same time has been doing its homework. It was massively, it's a power which has been massively rearming itself. Its defense budget grew by 300% since 2000. So it's a massive expansion. And it has been basically consistently working to undermine the West. So we missed our chance in 2014. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and we have not responded by any real material defense measures, but only by sanctions and by enhanced forward presence at the eastern flank, which did not really make a great deal of material difference. So here we are at this point in time, and what we need to do in order to catch up, to prepare ourselves to be ready. I think that three essential things. Number one, we need more money to be invested in defense. And I don't mean another 2 or 3 billion, but I think we need something along the lines of what Thierry Breton proposed, meaning a defense fund to the tune of 100 billion euro. Financed via Eurobonds, or you can take it from some other sectors like agriculture, for example. Well, I'm kidding here, but yes, we need to put this money there, and we also need access to finance. That's another problem here. The defense industry has been stigmatized in Europe itself. The defense industry has limited access to loans, and it's perceived by banks as a tobacco industry, yeah, or basically bad boys that produce harmful things which are bad for people. So that needs to be addressed, and the European Council has called for that. We also we really need a major investment in defense industry, especially on the eastern flank. What we've been doing in the eastern flank of NATO has been buying a lot of the stuff from abroad, especially from outside of the EU, United States, Korea, yeah, especially in Poland itself. Yeah, so we spend a great deal on defense, but European defense industry does not benefit from that, and defense industry is an aspect of defense and deterrence. And so we need to be mindful of that, and we need to focus on that. And I think I used up my time at this point in time. So over to Alina, and I'm open to questions and comments that may follow.
Thank you. Yeah, you're very. Thank you for keeping very kind of carefully to the minute. I appreciate that very much. Excellent introductory remarks. Alina, now to you. So my kind of leading question, although Martin, I'm going to go back to you eventually and ask still, do you think Europe's going to step up? But we'll get to it a little later. But Alina, so my question going to be is more about the need for strategic adjustments. So we kind of mentioned the deteriorating strategic environment in Europe necessitates kind of these significant adjustments in policy and defense. The EU must adapt swiftly and effectively to address these evolving threats. The thing is the EU positioned well enough to do so, or without specifically kind of robust US support?
Thank you. There is another element which we are lacking, or there is one more thing which we don't have enough of, and this is time. Because we don't know how much how much longer Ukrainians are going to hold the line, how much longer they're going to resist. With an already announced Russian offensive in late May, early June, we don't know what the result of this is going to be. So time is of essence. This is another element which is lacking and which is pressing us. So the answer to your question is yes. In principle, we can adapt. Yes, in principle, not only we can, but we have to. But it also depends on how much time we have and the objectives that we set upon ourselves in the next year, in the next 5 years, and in the next 10 years. And what did it take Europe to adapt? And this is an adaptation that has already started. We started talking about European sovereignty, not only when it comes to military defense, but also when it comes to economic security. And as President Macron indicated in his speech today, even when it comes to cultural sovereignty, this is a little bit more dangerous to discuss. We won't get into this, but we are talking about sovereignty, autonomy, forced by events rather more than by our own will. So what would it take Europeans to adapt further? First of all, political will. As Martin indicated, there is not enough money. There is not enough money made available for defense industry, and for a strategic approach to European defense. Although money could be made available if political will was there. So this is something that is also lacking. But then I think what is also lacking, and we are not talking really enough about it, is the population support and population understanding of what a strategic adaptation and what European sovereignty actually means and implies. We can see that population support to Ukraine, to the war in Ukraine, to the defense efforts that Europe is making, this support is decreasing, and as the populations, not only in Central and Eastern Europe but throughout Europe, don't really understand the importance of enhancing rather the defense posture. This is another element that will need to be addressed in order for us to pursue with our adaptation. And last but not least, your question was about US support. Now, I would like to make a differentiation here between support and cooperation. We got used to the idea, to the reality, not only idea, that US was supporting Europe in its security, in its defense, and we're very much dependent on this support. But now we have to take it, and we started really taking it to the next stage, which is we want to cooperate. We want to continue to cooperate with the US when it comes to security, when it comes to defense, when it comes to economy, and in all of the other elements of what really made the transatlantic relation so fruitful so far. But it should be cooperation rather than dependence. We should seek for equal footing. Would be too much to ask at this time, but rather than depending on US support, we should look for cooperation. And there are quite a number of elements that EU has and could put on the table to further the cooperation with the US. Not only when it comes to defense, maybe here it's one of the sector where we are a little weaker, but in the economic field. So we should really start looking at at U.S. at an equal partner, equal ally, rather than somebody we are depending on and whose support we continuously seek.
Thank you very much. Those are excellent points, and you kind of sparked an idea with me actually as you were speaking there, Alina. But Martin, I'm going to kind of go back. It's a question that in tangent to this with a U.S. support. You're talking about financing and the difficulty that the defense sector has in kind of financing. Is it? I mean, I know that the EU is now kind of trying to encourage different institutions to open up kind of more of their lending. But are there any other roadblocks that are kind of preventing them from getting the financing that they need, or could it be something that the EU themselves kind of invest in more directly?
Well, the two most important things is that the EU itself has allocated very little resources for defense-related projects. So it was initially 2.5 billion euro in the budget of the European Defense in the European Defense Fund. What's left of that is at the moment is about 1.5. Yeah. So in terms of defense contracts, this is peanuts money. There really is not something which can be used to make a strategic difference. I mean, it's suffice to say that, for example, the Czech initiative on collecting ammunition for Ukraine at the world market is itself costing 3.3 billion euro, and it's all coming from national contributions. So the EU does not contribute a penny to that. So clearly, the EU itself must decide that maybe some money should be allocated a little bit differently. I mean, I would argue, but I think it would be very controversial, that indeed a lot of money is going towards the agricultural sector, and our long-term future in the next 10 years less depend on more generous farming subsidy than actually providing arms to defend ourselves. Yeah, I think the need here is urgent. When we had COVID-19, we did find money. Yeah, we created the recovery fund, and suddenly, like I don't know what the entire value of this of the COVID fund, but it goes into hundreds of billion euro, and some of them is being guaranteed via the euro bonds. And that is something which we may want to consider in this context. Similar scheme towards defense as the scheme we had towards the recovery fund and coping with the impacts of COVID-19. The other thing is, which I mentioned briefly, is access to loans. There was some silly regulation of European Commission. The European Commission created a problem itself a few years back before Russia invaded Ukraine, where it advised the banks that against issuing loans for harmful industries. And a lot of banks, including the EU-owned bank, European Investment Bank, interpreted that it means the defense industry is no longer kosher. Yeah? So for the last 2.5 years, defense industry has been basically stigmatized. Yeah? And that's a problem which neither Korean nor American banks or defense industries in these countries have. So we've been kind of on this defense market, we've been disarming ourselves in terms of being uncompetitive with other industries. So these two things need to be addressed, and the first one is more difficult when it comes to changing EU rules on and issuing a clear communication the defense industry is actually a public good. The EU started to do things on that, especially the Council. But we need a clear statement from the incoming Commission saying that advising banks that that it is good and consistent with European defense industrial strategy to actually issue loans to banks, to defense industry.
That's a great concrete proposal. I like that. Alina, sticking just for a moment still also kind of with the, should we say, the kind of economic component of security. How do you feel about well, it's to do with the U.S. package of aid that kind of came to you, was passed through the Senate this past week and signed by President Biden. But in line with this, it's a little bit about the frozen Russian assets. So how do you feel about using frozen Russian assets to kind of first to kind of maybe gift in the process the security element for Ukraine, but as well as kind of just shoring up the defenses of Europe in general? How do you feel about the use of them in this kind of context?
Well, it depends what you mean by the use of them. If you're talking about using the principle of these assets, then this is a problem, and I have actually, and GMF has advised against touching the principle for very many reasons that have to do with international law. And with the economic stability, the international economic and financial stability. But there are other ways, there are other creative and lucrative ways to use the interest, to use the taxes, to use the revenues of these assets, or even to use these assets as guarantees against loans. And this is something that is actively pursued by the Europeans. We are talking about Europeans. Most of the assets are in Europe. We are talking about European assets here. So yes, this is something that it's being done. It's being done already. The Belgian government has done it to a certain extent. But I think most of this money should actually go to Ukraine, not only because of moral reasons, but because it is Ukraine that really needs this money. The $61 billion package that was just approved, it is probably enough for now, but we need to think about supporting Ukraine on a longer term, not only in the immediate term and not only militarily, but also financially. So I think this money should go to Ukraine rather than going into developing European defense industry. And as Marcin indicated, really there is money out there. If Europeans really wanted and were really all of them were really serious about addressing it, they could find money. They could allow for loans. Marcin already, sketched a real very good financial strategy for having the industry developed. But even if this money was available somehow through a combination of everything you can and anything you can imagine, I believe there is still another problem, and one of the problem is the weakness of the defense industry, especially in the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So what's happening right now when you're talking about contracts and big contracts and contracts that should be and are being taken by some of the defense companies, we are mainly talking about Western European companies. We are not talking about, or very limitedly about, Central and Eastern European companies. So some serious thinking and some serious funding also could and should be put into enhancing the national defense industries on the eastern flank itself, and not only in strengthening, revitalizing them, if you want, but also looking more seriously into joint procurement and joint production and into synergies of scale, which not only are desirable, but I think they are imperative for countries in Central and Eastern Europe, given the state of their defense industries.
So related to, thank you. Related to that, I'm going to have a kind of follow-up question. How far away do you think we are from having some kind of reliable production line or logistic kind of chain in Central Europe related to maybe more ammunition production? Either one. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Who did you want to answer, myself or Mark?
Sorry, it was a quick follow-up. So,
if we are talking about providing ammunition to Ukraine, I think we still have a pretty, well, not that long, but a pretty good way to go. There are efforts, and there is a company which is opening in Romania pretty soon. Rheinmetall is opening one such factory to provide to make ammunition and to provide it to Ukraine. But I think we still have a long way to go, because we don't know how long the war is going to last and how long we will have to provide ammunition to Ukraine for. There are efforts in Ukraine itself and in other countries to create the same sort of factories, but we still have a long way to go.
Okay, so you've both mentioned basically, or at least from what I'm hearing, there seems to be a lack of political will on certain segments of society as well as politicians. What could you kind of pinpoint any kind of element of why people have, let's say, a reluctance to just kind of face the realities that Europe is facing a different security situation than it did 10, 15 years ago? Martin, this is for you.
Well, I mean, it is simply painful. So, I mean, it's just like we all have this tendency to procrastinate. If you need to face some kind of difficult measures which can hurt, you tend to postpone it and not to see the problem. Yeah? And that is what I think quite commonly the kind of a syndrome that we've been having in Europe. Even the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which kept saying for years that Russia is a threat, that Russia is not a partner, but we will be faced with a revisionist Russia sooner or later. So we had that understanding, but it's quite recent for nations of Central and Eastern Europe to actually spend on defense more than 2% of GDP. It's only since 2014 that most of these nations started to do that, and still not all of them. And even in the Baltic states, I mean, Estonia was always, spending decently, but I mean, other states in the Baltic states until 2014 were not, were abandoning conscription, were not investing a great deal in defense, and we all led our defense industry to go down, basically. Yeah. All the rearmaments that Poland, Romania, the other are doing is through the basis of procurement in outside of our own countries. Not all of it, but a great majority of it, really. Yeah. And even outside, not just outside of our own defense industries, but outside of Europe. Yeah. So according to the data quoted by European Defense Industrial Strategy, only 18% of European procurement is actually executed in Europe itself. So we've been vastly buying in America, Korea, Turkey, Israel, you name it, yeah? But not in Europe, yeah? Not just mention Central and Eastern Europe. So like I said, we used to, even Central Europeans which have had a better awareness what Russia really is, still neglected their own defense and deterrence.
Well, yeah, as you pointed out correctly, I think there is a little bit of a psychology that's at work here. I'm just gonna say it's time now for us to kind of end the on the record part of the discussion.